comes with having a house full of kids. There's the bad kind, like season-ending injuries. There's the necessary kind, like having an agent in Hollywood. And there's silly drama, like the drama around my percolating pectorals. And then there's the drama you can skip.
Skip the drama that comes with not having your high school diploma or equivalency. Find free adult education classes near you and finish your high school diploma. Visit finishyourdiploma.org.
Or text diploma to 97779. Message and data rates may apply. Reply STOP to opt out. That's diploma to 97779. And leave the drama to actors like me.
Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Adopt US Kids presents Multiple Choice Parenting.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes?
How could he do this to you? And for Sheila, she has split ends.
B, console her?
Oh, sweetie, this is going to happen a lot. 4, maybe 5 more times before you get married.
C, take charge?
Got to get this all straightened out. Give a little talking to, man to man, mano a mano. Hey, Steve! Is now a good time? No? Okay, no problem. Bye.
Or D, help her find a new boyfriend?
I know a great place to meet boys. The internet. Nice, single boys. Never mind. How about some ice cream?
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
For more information on how you can adopt, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
This is you over 30 years ago.
Are we there yet? Are we there yet?
And this is your mom when you drive her back from therapy.
Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?
Roles change without us noticing, and in your new role, we help you help. AARP gives you the information to help care for your mom so that you can have patience with her, just like she did with you. Visit aarp.org/caregiving or call 1-877-333-5885 to get practical health and wellness tips to provide even better care for your loved one.
Are we there yet?
Remember, visit aarp.org/caregiving. AARP. We help you help. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
When I was little, I didn't talk for a long time. I liked things to always be the same. Anything new or different would scare and upset me. I was very sensitive to lights and sounds. It was almost like I had bigger eyes and ears than everyone else. So I built secret hiding places where nothing could get in. I didn't like looking people in the eye. It made me feel uncomfortable. I'd throw big tantrums over little things like when my socks didn't match. Sometimes I'd do the same things over and over. Until one day, I found out I had autism. My family got me help. Slowly, I learned how to live with it better.
You can see signs of autism in children as young as 18 months. Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org/signs. Brought to you by Autism Speaks and the Ad Council.
It's Thursday night, and you're grabbing drinks with some friends. Started off with a pitcher for the table, which quickly becomes 2. There's pool. And there's the photo booth.
All right, everybody squeeze in. Say cheese!
Followed naturally by an order of wings. And another.
Can we get some extra ranch sauce?
Then there's the ceremonial nightcap.
So what are we doing this weekend?
And lastly, it's back to the car, which, if you're buzzed, could be the most expensive night of your life. Getting pulled over for buzzed driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates. Nothing kills a buzz like getting pulled over for buzzed driving, because buzzed driving is drunk driving. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
You're listening to the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. This is the MD's Fantasy Football Show with Dan Mader. Giving you the X's and O's of all things fantasy. On the Worldwide Sports Radio Network.
Hello, MD Nation, and welcome into the show. You are listening to the MD's Fantasy Football Show on the Worldwide Sports Radio Network at WWSRN, also presented to you by Belly Up Sports. Hopefully you're watching the live stream here on social media at Belly Up MDFF Show or on a YouTube channel. But like every episode, we are always available to you afterwards on your favorite pod streaming app, whether it be Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeart, wherever. We are widely available to you guys. I am your host, Dan Mader, joined here with Chris Dowhower. Chris, how are you doing? How are you feeling about our 2 back-to-back episodes in a row now that we're getting closer and closer to the season, soon to go to 5 a week when the season kicks off?
I think on yesterday's show, you said this is like the best time of the year in a lot of senses. I couldn't agree more. It's super exciting. Football is approaching. You're getting your draft strategies in place, and it's almost fantasy season.
It is almost fantasy season, and the big thing is trying to evaluate the value that these players have, making sure you're avoiding the potholes that are inevitable in every fantasy football draft and snagging the value of where you really need it and where it can best serve you, and sleeper value late that can be the difference between you being a non-playoff team, a playoff team, or even being the difference between a championship team and a playoff team. And that's why we have this series today. It's called the Best 5, Bust 5, Sleeper 5. Last week, we talked about the quarterback, so go back and watch that or stream that on your favorite pod streaming app. Today is going to be about the running backs, which is probably the most pivotal position there is, because you have running backs tend to go early. There's so much value at that position when it comes to fantasy football. However, it's also probably the biggest position when it comes to potholes and derailing rosters and derailing lineups, which is why this is probably the most important Best 5, Bust 5, Sleeper 5 edition in the series, is when we talk about the running backs, which is what we're going to be doing today. So before we kick that off, though, I want to give a big shout out to our sponsor, Symbol, today, the beginning half of today's show. SIMBULL, Symbol, their new sports gambling innovative app where they bring the fun of being able to play for the long term by purchasing, selling, and trading stocks of your teams. When your teams win, you do win a payout, but when they lose, you don't actually lose money. The value of your team's share is all that matters, and it's easy to use. Just download the Symbol app on your Play Store and use the promo code MDSFantasy for a $10 deposit bonus of at least $10 or more. Join the fun of investing in your team for the long haul, where the sportsbook edge is put back into your hands as the player. For the latest and most fun in sports gambling, download the Symbol app. And again, use the promo code MDSFantasy for your $10 deposit today. And as I've said before, I'm actually having a lot of fun playing on that app right now. Just a different way to play in sports gamble. And we're going to have, that's one thing I want to mention, Chris, because we haven't really talked about that too much. Our show this year is going to be a little bit different, not just the addition of Chris for the end season, but it's also going to be a little bit different in the sense of we're going to be talking a lot more about our bets this year throughout this show. It's not just going to be fantasy football. It's going to be fantasy football plus different ways to win you guys money, different bets that we like. Obviously, we're going to have the Saturday show that used to be the DC's DFS show. That's now going to be an MD's Fantasy Football Show edition. Same concept, though. We're going to give you our DraftKings lineup cards, and we're going to have our contest, championshipfootballs.com by Mr. Chaz Filardi. We'll have our monthly giveaways to win. So you have to win, get your name eligible for a raffle at the end of the month to see who wins a championship football for free from Mr. Chaz Filardi. And he'll still be coming on those shows in the second half. We'll talk about our favorite bets, but we're also going to be previewing our bets on Thursday and Friday as well for each and every game, what we like, what we don't like, or we just don't want to bet it at all. So that's something that's going to be added into the show this year that we didn't have last year. We're always growing, always trying to improve. Before we get this thing into the running backs, like every show, we got news that we got to talk about real quick.
Breaking news.
So there was some news that we didn't talk about yesterday's show because I want to talk about today's show is more fitting with the running back episode, kicking it off with Zack Moss hurt his hamstring. This has always been an issue with Zack Moss. So Zack Moss, Devin Singletary, what's their value to you, Chris, in general, and what is the Zack Moss injury do in your mind for this Buffalo Bills backfield?
Yeah, I mean, I had Zack Moss ahead of Singletary because I thought this was Moss's opportunity to kind of take, lead position in that for them. I think that he was utilized more and more as the season progressed last year. He's definitely was utilized more in the red zone. So I thought he had more upside than Singletary. But I do think this is definitely a concern. It basically makes me not really want to touch Buffalo's backfield. I wasn't big on it in the first place. A lot of people were looking for maybe a breakout from one of these guys, but I think both of them have their concerns where you have Singletary, lighter build, can he ever handle the load? And then you have Moss, who just basically has been injured for the last couple of years, and a guy, you can't necessarily bank on. So I think for me, in our yesterday's show, we did our drafts. We kind of talked about the importance of making sure you had a core running backs that you can depend on. This is where I'm not a big fan of the zero running back strategy because a lot of people like Zack Moss is one of those guys, and now as you already see, he might be off the board for you.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, the expectation is Zack Moss is going to be back for week 1. But we always knew this was going to be a committee backfield. The idea was that Zack Moss, and I still have him ranked ahead, the idea is that Zack Moss was going to get the opportunity to be more of the guy with Devin Singletary getting worked in. The biggest difference between the two, not just Zack Moss, being leaned on more so as the starter, but we knew he's going to be much more involved in the passing game over a Devin Singletary. Neither running back was very impressive last year. The running game in general was almost non-existent for the Buffalo Bills. The idea was it has to be a little bit more involved this year than it was a season ago just because it was so low in volume. And Zack Moss, for me, is still going to be a guy that I'm willing to take late who has some upside. But Devin Singletary is going to have maybe a round or two later type of value too. These are guys you're taking as RB5s on your team, RB4s maybe, and taking shots on to see what they could become. This doesn't really change that, but this does go to play. Zack Moss, again, having to deal with those soft tissue injuries. I'm actually going to talk about Devin Singletary a little bit later too. Saquon Barkley, he returned to practice, or I should say he cleared the PUP list. Still hasn't been, full go yet, but he is starting to do some individual drills, not doing team drills yet. This does put him maybe more back on the pace because we had some reports last week about maybe they're going to hold out Saquon Barkley to week 3. This puts him more on the pace of sounds like he's going to be back for week 1 and playing week 1. Chris, where are you at on Saquon Barkley with this news?
I mean, I think this is huge news. As long as he continues to trend in the right way, I think it puts him back in the conversations with the top tier running backs. And where I was kind of considering, was he truly a first rounder if he's going to miss 3 games and still not really sure, when he's going to get his sea legs back, so to speak. I think this kind of makes me more confident that if I take a first round, pick with Saquon Barkley, I could be hopeful that it's going to pan out versus last year where, a lot of people got burned by that. So for me, I think it's huge news because you don't want a guy you take in the first round missing the first 3 weeks and not really sure what he actually has yet.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on that standpoint because Barkley's somebody he's been slipping down. He was consensus going in the top 5. That's not really the case so much anymore. He's actually, I see him more consistently going around 6 now as far as running backs are concerned, usually 6 overall too, the boot. I have him ranked at 9th in half-point PPR leagues at the moment because I still just, it's not just him. I'm shaky about that offense. I'm shaky about that offensive line and how effective they're going to be and how high scoring they're going to be. This is big news to your point as far as, is he going to be out there week 1? Now, will they allow him to be Saquon Barkley already starting week 1 with the bell cow? It remains to be seen. Here's my issue, though, with the idea that he's not going to be. Talk about this before on this show. There's a difference between the theoretical ideas coaches would like to ideally do on the field, and then there's when you get out on the field and realize what works and what doesn't work. Devontae Booker's not good. Devontae Booker is just a guy. And other than him, there's nobody even worth 10 cents on the Giants' backfield. So it's hard for me to believe that Saquon Barkley's not out there. He's not getting a bell cow workload, but he does have injury risk. This is a low-scoring offense. There's going to be some bust risk, I believe, involved with Saquon Barkley, which is why I'm glad to see his ADP kind of falling back to what he needs to be. Still a first-round pick, ultimately speaking, in my book. Just shouldn't be in the top 5 area. This news goes a long way to kind of track that and confirm that in my mind. Will Fuller, we talked about him somewhat in yesterday's show when we talked about the half-point PPR mock draft. Go back and stream that when you get the opportunity if you did not watch it live. Still not practicing. Still dealing with the foot issue. Hasn't practiced since the second day of training camp. That's been an issue. Devontae Parker is back. He missed some time. Jalen Waddle, whose reports are he's still kind of working with the ankle injury, but at least he's been the only wide receiver who's actually practiced every single day. But Chris, with Will Fuller still not practicing, are you concerned with it being a new team, a new coaching staff, a new quarterback that he has to learn? He's just not getting reps.
Not quite yet. For me, and if he's not back in about 2 weeks, then I'll start panicking, because let's not forget he's suspended for that first game. So more than likely he wasn't going to be featured in the game plan as it was. And as long as he gets a few weeks of practice with the Dolphins and Tua, I feel confident he'll be able to produce. But I think that it has to happen sooner than later. So I'm not really worried. I'm not in the panic button yet, but I will be hitting it in about 2 weeks if he's not back yet.
I'm ahead on you on this. Today's Friday. If he ain't back by Monday, I'm going to start to hit the panic button a little bit as far as what my boom bust ratio is for a guy like this. Again, he's still more on the sleeper end territory because of the ADP and where he's going. And I still think on a game-to-game basis, you're talking about the number one receiver of this offense. And he still has those big upside because he's Will Fuller and what he does on the field. But I need more than 2 weeks of reps for me to feel confident that he can hit the ground running, especially when you consider he ain't going to be around week 1. And that includes in practice, too, when he's suspended. He's not even allowed in the facility. So it's just, as far as getting that season kicked off the way you want it to, as I'm a little bit concerned about. And when you compound that fact with the idea that Will Fuller's a guy who just gets injured, I think he has a limited amount of games in his repertoire for this season to begin with. It just starts to really hurt his value to where maybe instead of being that 8th, 9th round guy that can be some upside, maybe he should be going more into double-digit rounds if he's not out there and just a slow start, because it is a new regime. It is a new quarterback. I want this guy out there on Monday. The other thing that bugs me about this, and it bugs me about any player in training camp, is that they still won't tell me exactly what the foot issue is, which in and of itself kind of bothers me a little bit too, not exactly having the exact details on that. So we'll see. Next piece of news we're going to have some wide things to talk about on this one. Joe Burrow displaying a mental hurdle on this team. And I'm going to lead us off before I kick it to you by saying this. This is on me. I should have talked about this a while ago on this show with Joe Burrow. And the reason I didn't was this. Quarterbacks coming off of ACL injuries, they typically have a mental hurdle they need to get over. But because Burrow is so young, because he has that charismatic, confident attitude, I kind of just took for granted that he wouldn't have the issue that most quarterbacks do have when they're coming off an ACL injury. So that's on me, MD Nation. I should have talked about this sooner, about this being a possibility when looking at the upside and potential expectations of the Cincinnati Bengal offense. I've been big on, I shouldn't say big, but I like Jamar Chase. I like T. Higgins. I even have Tyler Boyd as somebody I think is being undervalued. And the reason for all that is why I have, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins as wide receiver 3s with upside is the expectation that Joe Burrow would be his regular old self. Reports in camp is that he definitely has a mental hurdle that he needs to get over to get his confidence back. And that's something that really shouldn't be surprising, but is a bit disappointing when you're excited about what this offense potentially could have on the docket. What do you think about this Joe Burrow news?
Yeah, I think it's definitely concerning, and I agree with you that it's something that you have to kind of definitely keep in mind. We saw Carson Wentz kind of have deteriorated since he has major injuries. He wasn't the same player after that. You've seen other quarterbacks have some issues, whether it's mentally or just physically stepping into their throws a lot of times, and the accuracy and the mechanics kind of break down from the injuries or concerning about it getting re-injured. So I'm very concerned with Joe Burrow, not kind of where he is and being as rusty as he is. I think it's going to be hard for him to kind of, start the season running in a sense, because I think he's going to have a hard, without being able to take live action or being hit, you don't really know what it's going to feel like. You don't really know how you're going to react. So I do think Joe Burrow's news is definitely concerning. I think it makes you kind of look at, the backfield a little bit more strongly, because you realize that they might more reliant on the running game where they have just, pure volume last year in passing game. And then also the concern of the offensive line. They did take Chase as their pick instead of taking Sewell. And as a result, is that going to be something they kind of wind up regretting, because now you have a quarterback who was fairly mobile last year and used his legs a pretty decent amount. So now he can't really maybe do the same kind of things, wasn't confident he could do the same things. Does that also hurt, him moving forward?
Yeah, a lot of things to kind of dissect there. They're talking about him not playing in the preseason. We talk about this off air. I think it's a mistake. I think this is a guy in this situation. I get it. You don't want to get your franchise quarterback hurt in a meaningless game, but this is a guy who needs to get his confidence back. He needs to get his feet wet. He needs to get smacked around. Sometimes these guys need to get smacked around a little bit to snap back into it. And for him to really prepare and get over the mental hurdle, he's got to be thrown to the fire. So this is a situation where I think he does need preseason reps. It doesn't sound like he's going to get them. And I kind of question how fast of a start or how high is the ceiling of a start for the Cincinnati Bengals offense when it might be, a month into the football season before we see Burrow start to get confidence. And even then, there's no guarantee. I mean, I look at Jimmy Garoppolo's, and as a 49ers fan, and it was just clear to me coming off the ACL injury, and they went to the Super Bowl that year. But they went to the Super Bowl that year too. But you could still tell there was a mental hurdle when it came to wanting to step into his throws and take the hit all the time. And that's something I think we could see with Joe Burrow, and that will hinder, the potential ceiling of a Jamar Chase and a T. Higgins. So those are things to kind of look out for. On the flip side of that, Joe Mixon might be even more and more of a thing. We're confident in Joe Mixon. I have him ranked in the top 12. You have him, I know, as an RB1, a low-end RB1 at the very least. And we think that if nothing else, this could mean they try to take additional pressure off of Joe Burrow, which should lead to more and more volume for Joe Mixon. The only thing standing in Joe Mixon's way, really, from a great fantasy season is injury, which, of course, is a big risk, which is really the only reason why I have him in my top 12 and a second-round pick instead of being a first-round pick is because of that risk. But as far as volume goes, ability goes, what his role should be in this offense and what they're going to need him for, I really like Joe Mixon a lot. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think they're going to be even more reliant on the running game in a lot of ways. They're going to try to probably make sure they protect, him, and also have more check down opportunities for him where maybe not pushing the ball down the field. We love Higgins' ability down the field. We love Chase's ability down the field, but there's going to still more check down action because you're going to need to kind of get the ball out of this guy's hands quicker.
Next piece of news, the ever-ending fiasco that is the Jaguars coaching staff. James Robinson and Carlos Hyde listed as co-starters with Travis Etienne as the third string back, the pass catching back. This is in line with the comments made by Urban Meyer when they drafted Travis Etienne, which he imagined a 1-2 punch with James Robinson and Carlos Hyde, with Travis Etienne being the third down pass catching back. I still have to see it before I believe it as far as Carlos Hyde and James Robinson splitting carries. But this does go a long way in confirming the insanity that is Urban Meyer. Before I go off on a diatribe, Chris, let's just get your 2 cents in here on what this news means to you.
I take it with a grain of salt. While I do think Robinson's going to be more involved than a lot of people do think, I also remember, I'm not dumb enough to believe what Urban Meyer says. We've also heard this guy say that, Trevor Lawrence isn't necessarily the starter yet. There's still an open competition. So we all know Trevor Lawrence will be under the center week 1. It's not going to be Minshew. It's not going to be anybody else. So I kind of think it's a good salt.
Shocking.
Because we've realized this guy's kind of, hyping up things. But also, this guy might actually have Tim Tebow as his tight end. So you never really know what to believe and what not to believe.
Well, you just hit the nail on the head. That's the point. We don't know what to believe and what not to believe. Tim Tebow is a tight end. Tim Tebow actually still has a chance to start, believe it or not. So this is where it's a first-round running back who has upside and already has a rapport with the quarterback. They already have a good feel for each other in that backfield. This is a team that didn't have anything to do with James Robinson last year. There's been times where they had comments that sounded like they don't really particularly care for James Robinson at moments. And it's hard for me to believe, especially in today's day and age, that go back to the first round, when you take a running back in the first round, to not play him a ton. Even if you are just giving him that third down pass catching role, it's hard for me to believe that he is not going to be the guy splitting carries with James Robinson, with a Carlos Hyde, and eventually possibly take over the role entirely by the end of the season. It's hard for me not to believe that wouldn't go that way. However, this is the one situation, I shouldn't say the one situation, but this is a prime example, let's say, of logically what should play out, and a coaching staff that, even though it's early on, we haven't even seen a game out of Urban Meyer yet from the NFL standpoint. Boy, oh boy, do I have questions what this guy is.
Yeah, well, the jury's definitely out on Urban. I think that, this sounds like more of like a college ploy. And I don't know if it's going to be able to transfer to the pros. Guys don't like to know necessarily want to battle to be starters. Usually you name your starters by, throughout the camp, you have an idea who's going to be your guys. This isn't a necessary thing where you're bringing in a freshman and he's going to sit and learn behind the seniors. So I'm definitely concerned about Urban Meyer's start. And I'm kind of concerned as it progresses, how dumb will he go?
Yeah, exactly. I just got some news actually about Joe Burrow. So while he was ruled out early on in yesterday's preseason game, he wasn't going to play. Zach Taylor actually just came out and said that they may be leaving the door open to get Joe Burrow some reps in either next week or the third preseason game. So maybe they're softening on the stance of not playing him in the preseason. Maybe they just listened to the MD's Fantasy Football Show and took some advice. We'll go with that. That's totally what just happened. Zach Taylor just listened to us and said, you know what? You guys are on to something. And Joe Burrow might get some reps in preseason. That would be the best scenario. They got to get his feet wet. We just talked about that. Okay, Chris, let's dive in to our best 5, bust 5, sleeper 5, starting off with the best, because let's start off the show on a positive note. We have our top 5 guys. Different order, but the same top 5 guys. So, Chris, we'll start with you. You have, we'll have some fun here. We'll hit the state your case. Why is Derrick Henry? Why do you hate Derrick Henry so much at number 5 when he's my number 2?
I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
Start that again because you go on mute when I hit the clip.
It's not a matter of hating Derrick Henry. I think that there's a very slim margin between a lot of these guys. I think that when it comes to Derrick Henry, my concern more so is will his involvement change a little bit this year versus past years. This guy doesn't catch the ball. We know that out of the backfield. You do hear a lot of talk about camp, how they're trying to get Evans more out in the field and utilize him a little bit more. And then on top of it, you add a Julio Jones. This team more than likely will be more explosive and more pass happy than they have been in the past. You move on from Arthur Smith, so this is another change there. So overall, my concern more so is Derrick Henry needs, a lot of touches, especially in the running game, to be productive. And while you might get that, as the season progresses or here and there, I have a little bit more question the consistency of how much that occurs this year versus past years, because we have had, him start off the season slow before and then usually hit his stride. But having his extra weapons, especially big play weapons, to me might have a little less drives, a little less Derrick Henry usage. So that's why I have him at number 5.
I talked about this a little bit in yesterday's show. Again, I think after Chris McCaffrey, who I think should be the number 1 on everyone's boards, I do believe it is a preference pick between those 4 guys as far as who you want to go with. I just trust Derrick Henry more than really anybody in the NFL when it comes to the running back position to stay healthy for all 17 games. Just the way he's built, the way he conducts himself, how he stays in shape, and he's just a monster. So I think that part gets, of course, in the plus column. And while I have him for regression, because I'm not going to project him for another 2,000-yard season, I have him for like 40 less carries, a little over 1,700 yards, and I have him for 16 touchdowns, only 1 less touchdown. I think overall, this Tennessee offense is going to score more points this year with the addition of Julio Jones. I think they're going to be a little bit more aggressive. I do have questions about, the efficiency of a Todd Downey call playing compared to Arthur Smith. But as long as they are a higher scoring offense, which I do believe they will be, and because Derrick Henry is who he is, which is just consistently an ogre, I still have him as the RB2, even in half-point PPR leagues. Now, if you're in a full-point PPR league, that's where he'll probably drop back to number 5 for me, because Kamara, Dalvin Cook, Ezekiel Elliott, there's going to be so much more involved in the passing game, and you're just going to run the risk too often of if Derrick Henry doesn't hit 100 yards, if he doesn't score a touchdown in that game, he doesn't wind up stacking up to those other guys. So you have that issue that kind of plays into effect. But you're in standard half-point PPR leagues, and we usually do the show based on half-point PPR leagues. Derrick Henry is going to be one of the top guys, and I love the fact that he always gets stronger when the season moves on. As he gets colder, he is a championship league winner, and that can't be discounted. So that's why I have him ultimately at number 2 compared to the number 5. Again, we're nitpicking when we talk about the best 5. So let's continue on. You have Ezekiel Elliott number 4. I have number 5. We're pretty close in that similar territory. Chris, what's your take on Ezekiel Elliott this year?
Yeah, I think we both agree this guy has definitely been written off too early in his career and is basically being forgotten about. Zeke's, very productive running back. He is a guy that's utilized both in the rushing game and the passing game. He had basically his worst year last year. I expect this offense to improve a lot, particularly with the offensive line actually being more healthy. You have Dak Prescott returning. So all those factors, to me, makes Dallas one of the better offenses. And I usually want to have one of the running backs one of the better offenses. So for me, I love Zeke this year. I think, you can argue whether you have Derrick Henry over him or not, but I think it's clear to me that Zeke belongs in the top 5.
He does. And I'll make a quick note, and we talked about him opening up the show. We don't have Saquon Barkley in our top 5. A big reason for that, for me, is because Ezekiel Elliott has to be there. And that's why he's my number 5 guy. I'm motivated in shape Zeke behind this offensive line in this high-scoring offense in general is a scary, scary thought. We know what Zeke can be. We know he's a top 3 guy when he's playing the best of his game. He's actually lighter now than he ever has been in his pro career. He's actually weighs the same amount he did in his freshman year of college. That's how much he came into this season motivated. That's a scary, scary thought of what he can do with his offense. I talk about this a lot with running backs, especially. Hear about all the time, guys gain weight, lose weight during the offseason, what that really means. I hate it when running backs gain weight because usually they're a lot slower. They lose their explosiveness. I love it when they lose the weight because you usually can see that translate onto the field with that extra half step, especially when it's already a power guy like an Ezekiel Elliott, who's pretty much all muscle to begin with, has no neck. Ezekiel Elliott is that guy. So I love Zeke this year. He's my lockdown 5 pick. The only reason I don't have him a little higher is I don't think he quite has the ceiling of a Cook, Kamara, or Derrick Henry. It's the only reason I have him number 5, but I believe he's as safe as they come, and that's why I have him ahead of the Nick Chubbs, Aaron Jones, and Saquon Barkley's of the world there at that 5th spot. That's why you have him at number 4. So let's move to our next guy. You have Dalvin Cook number 3. I have him number 4. So talk about Dalvin Cook to me this year.
I mean, once again, we kind of are nitpicking where, Dalvin Cook could easily be in your top 2, top 3. I think that's somebody
Absolutely.
that, for me, I like him at number 3 because I have a preference of Kamara over him. But I think only because of slight injury concerns, Dalvin Cook has had a history of being injured. He was healthy for the most part last year, but you always have that kind of concern about him getting, a nicked up here or there. But overall, we know that offense is built for the running back. We've seen people like Arian Foster be dominant for years. And Dalvin Cook has no reason not to continue to be dominant. He's utilized in the rushing, in the rushing game. He's absolutely getting more and more involved in the passing game. One of the explosive players out there. And I think overall, for me, Dalvin just kind of still is showing how good he can really be.
Dalvin Cook's amazing. The offense around him is amazing. There's no question about it. I don't think you lose anything going from Kubiak Sr. to Kubiak Jr., which is what the Vikings are doing this year. The only reason I have number 4 behind CMC, Henry, and Kamara comes to the injury thing that you pointed out. He just has a little more injury risk than those guys. I am just going to value, when we're talking about these top guys here in the first and second round especially, I'm just going to value the safetyness, the availability, the injury, proudness, you will, a little bit more in those rounds, and I'm not going to look to take as many risks. I don't really consider Dalvin Cook a risk, but he's just a little bit more of a risk than a Kamara and a Derrick Henry. That's the only reason why he slides to number 4 spot for me out of those guys. I know people are going to say, whoa, Christian McCaffrey's your number 1, and he was hurt last year. Yeah, I get it. It can happen, but the history behind it, I have a little more confidence in those guys staying more healthy. It's the only reason why I have him number 4 compared to the rest of those guys. He has RB1 potential, pretty much like the rest of this top 5 does, quite frankly. Moving on, you have Alvin Kumar as your number 2. I have Alvin Kumar as my number 3. We have no concerns about the loss of Drew Brees. I'm not really sure why people do, frankly. Not that too many people do. Alvin Kumar right now, his ADP is RB4, so he's still in the top 5, but we have him inside of our top 3. Chris, talk about Alvin Kumar, your expectations for him in this offense.
Yeah, I mean, this narrative that he needs Drew Brees seems to be over-exaggerated. Talked about yesterday's show. Alvin Kamara's had his best games when Drew Brees was not out there. 2 years ago, he carried that Teddy Bridgewater red team. Last year, he carried them during their run when they showed Drew Brees as well. This offense will be built around Alvin Kamara.
Well, he did at the end of the year. I just want to clarify this one point, and I'll let you continue. He did at the end, but there was a string there where Kamara was disappointing those first 3 games Taysom Hill started. As just to throw that out there. Go ahead.
And there was that narrative that him and Taysom Hill he's going to vulture all his touchdowns. I think part of that also comes from the fact that the offensive line was a little nicked up during that time frame as well, and they played some better run defenses. So I think for me, it's more a other things factor than it was that the quarterback was the problem. I think that Alvin Kamara is just touching the surface as he can be utilized in the rushing game. I think that hopefully Sean Payton will utilize him a little bit more often, because the Saints are going to need to be able to feature them a little bit more. So And I also think that we clearly see he's one of the best pass catchers in the backfield. And with all the lack of weapons they currently have, particularly the injuries with Michael Thomas, I think that right now you see Alvin Kumar being that guy who's going to be utilized all over the field and was highly productive the last couple of years. And he had a banged up year the year before, but last year he rebounded great, and he was basically RB2 in almost every scoring category. So other than I think it was half point PPR, I think he was 3. This guy basically has been super productive, and I don't see that changing for any reason this year.
Yeah, and to play devil's advocate to my devil's advocate, even during that 4-game Taysom Hill stretch, he was still the RB9. So disappointing, I guess, in the sense that he was in a top 3 running back, but still was an RB1 during that stretch nonetheless. I'm with you. First of all, I still think it's going to be Jameis Winston who starts, but I think you hit the nail on the head when, given the lack of pass catchers, I don't care who the quarterback is, Alvin Kumar is going to be the number 1 pass catcher. He just is, which is actually going to lead to an interesting player that I'm going to talk about later on in the show too. But Alvin Kamara is as good as it gets. He is a superstar. He's a stud. Here's the other thing about him. This guy consistently finishes in the top 3 PPR, full point PPR. He was number 1 last year. Yet he still has not in his career to this point rushed over 200 times in a season. This is the year I have him projected to do that. I have him at 231. Again, this goes back to Alvin Kamara is the Saints offense, and he's going to be featured in a tremendous way. And I trust Sean Payton, who's going to be doing the featuring of the team. And that's always key when it comes to these running backs. Do I trust the play caller? Absolutely 100%. Getting Alvin Kamara the ball. Because of that, you're going to get an added volume. I still have him for over 100 targets, plus the extra carries this season. That's why he's my RB3. I don't care who the quarterback is. Drew Brees not being there is not going to be that much of a hurdle for him.
Just want to add real quick. On our list, we're top 5. Probably has going behind the second best offensive line. Maybe you can argue Dallas is better, but no one's offensive line's outstanding. So that's also a great asset for him.
Yeah, 100%. Another reason why they're just going to have to lean on that even more so. So that pretty much, we have CMC number 1. Chris, just give me your quick thoughts on what you think of CMC this year. You don't have to go into too much detail.
Yeah, I mean, yesterday's show, it's the guy I went number 1. I think Christian McCaffrey, to me, is clearly number 1. He has been the past few years, other than last year when he was injured. But even in those games he did play, and he wasn't even 100% towards the end of the season when he came back, he still finished in the top 10 RB, scoring-wise. So I think Christian McCaffrey, there's no reason to be scared about the injury thing. Last year's injuries were kind of freak things. It's not something he has a history of. They're not things that are ongoing problems for him. And then add the fact that basically you have check down machine Sam Darnold at quarterback. I think it's obvious that Christian McCaffrey is going to be the prime beneficiary of a guy who's not looking to look down the field. He'll be consistent in his volume. So I love Christian McCaffrey this year.
Yeah, we know there's one running back who has the upside of going for 1,000. That's Christian McCaffrey. Plain and simple. That's what it boils down to. He is tremendous. Last year, didn't play a lot. Yet when he did, week 1, he was the RB2 overall. Week 2, RB6 overall. Week 9, when he wasn't even 100% healthy, was the RB2 overall. Those are 3 games he played. Top 6 finishes in all 3 of them. And one of them definitely wasn't completely healthy for that game. That's the tremendousness that is Christian McCaffrey, especially, again, I trust the play caller. I trust Joe Brady. I trust Matt Rule. I trust that while I hate Sam Darnold, he's going to check the ball down. So there's nothing not to like about Christian McCaffrey. We talked about this before, not worried about the injuries. It wasn't an injury that's going to stay with him for his career or anything like that. It's not something he can't just fully recover from. He's going to be good to go. They played it cautious with him towards the end of the season because they were out of it. I do believe that if they were in a playoff race, he would have came back at the end of last year. They did it. I think they did the smart thing. I think he has a chance to come back 100% healthy this season. There's no reason not to take Christian McCaffrey with your number 1 overall picks. So that's our best 5. That's the guys that are no doubters. You'd start out the first round with it. Now let's talk about some guys that might create some potholes for people. You have Kareem Hunt, you're number 5. Before you even start talking, I'm going to hit this button, though.
I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Why do you hate Kareem Hunt as your number 5 bust, sir?
Because I don't understand this obsession that Kareem Hunt is going to be so productive and where he's going ADP-wise. He is the second running back on the Browns. He had an outrageous amount of touchdowns. And people love to talk about regression for quarterback touchdowns and receiver touchdowns, but they don't want to talk about Kareem Hunt's regression that's due for touchdown-wise. He's not going to have double-digit touchdowns again this year. And I think that the offense is going to be way more explosive in a lot of ways because they're going to have a healthy OBJ. and they're going to be utilizing the tight ends a little bit more. So all those things take away some of his catches, take away some of his usage. And I think Nick Chubb's going to have continues to be the top running back in that backfield. He got paid accordingly. So for me, I think that Kareem Hunt has a value that's good, but not a guy that I'm necessarily drafting to be my RB3 or my flex.
Yeah, completely disagree. So his ADP is RB22. He is an RB2. Last year, he finishes RB10. Again, that's with games with missing Nick Chubb. I don't care about that. I want to talk about the games where he played with Nick Chubb, which is why I'm convinced he is still an RB2 in this offense with the way Kevin Stefanski runs it, with the split that Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb have. With Nick Chubb, weeks 1 through 3, he was the RB12. Okay, we're talking about with Nick Chubb on the field, the RB12. Weeks 5 through 8, he was the RB10 with Nick Chubb. And then with Chubb again from weeks 9 through 17, he was the RB19. The fact is this, right or wrong, Nick Chubb doesn't get to catch the ball. And Kareem Hunt isn't only on there on passing downs. He also gets a couple series of games to himself. They do like him in the goal line at times. So while I think there might be a little bit of a bigger split, to your point, in the red zone when it comes to a Nick Chubb and a Kareem Hunt is still going to be involved enough in this crazy run-heavy offense of Kevin Stefanski where the entire offense revolves around this backfield. Kareem Hunt has enough talent where if you give him 12-plus touches a game, he'll finish as an RB2. And his ADP being RB22, I'm 100% with that as I have him ranked at RB23 this season. Go ahead, you can rebuttal.
No, I mean, I think that you kind of hit nail on the head in the sense that you have him at 23. I think that there's not so much where I think he falls as the RB is where I think he's getting drafted in the ranking wise. I think that he's going rounds way earlier than I think that he should because I still think that he's still a splitting time running back.
Well, right now he's typically going in the back end 4th round, early 5th round. That's typically where you would have a low end R running back go. So that's why I'm kind of confused as to why he's a bust there.
Because I think that there's a lot of right there. I think that you're looking for more upside running back, or you're looking for a receiver that you're solidifying in your lineup. As receivers in round 5, we kind of saw in yesterday's show. Kareem Hunt is somebody to me that if you're going to take him in the 7th or 8th round, I have no problem with. It's the round 4 or 5 that I definitely debate because I think there's other guys clearly more valuable to have on your team than a second running back in the system.
I'd be perfectly happy with Kareem Hunt being my, RB3 type, even a low end RB2 if I went heavy receiver. And I actually have to correct myself. So if you go to BellyUpFantasySports.com where you can see my rankings, I actually have Kareem Hunt, and I forgot I updated my rankings down to RB29 now, about 7 behind the 8. About 8 behind the AP, yeah. So that actually would suggest I'm a little bit on your side. I still don't think he's a bust where he's going. I still think he has tremendous upside, and we know what he can do. Even though I don't think he actually played well without Nick Chubb last year, but he was still a top 10 running back during that stretch anyway. I think that says something of himself. He still has that upside in case something happens to Chubb. He's still going to be involved. I just wouldn't have him in my bust area. I'm fine with where he's going, although my rankings would actually more point to your side, as you pointed out. We go here to bust 5, keep the list going. So I have Myles Gaskin as my number 5. Now, here's the thing about the Myles Gaskin, why I have him as my 5th guy. I don't have him ranked significantly different than the ADP. I actually have him only 1 or 2 spots, I believe, behind ADP right now as I'm trying to pull up my list in front of me because my screen, of course, always goes blank. I actually love technology. Myles Gaskin, I have at the moment ranked as the running back 23, and his ADP is RB21. So I have him 2 spots behind the ADP, which doesn't sound like a big deal. But sometimes when we talk about busts, we talk about guys that I see a pathway in which this could not go, the way we expect. Myles Gaskin I believe will be the starter. No, I don't think there's a stretch to say, obviously. He'll be the main pass catching guy. But there's a couple of things that worry me. 1, I don't think he has the build the last 17 games as a starter. 2, I don't think he's that great of a running back. I think he's okay at what he does. I think he's a guy who's better suited for a platoon role. 3, last year, we really did not get to see a healthy Myles Gaskin and a healthy Savon Ahmed at the same time. They seemed to kind of rotate when they were hurt. So we get to see one guy do pretty well, and then get hurt, and then the other guy do pretty well, and then get hurt. And we get to see these guys both at the same time. I am kind of curious, because Myles Gaskin's not a bell cow type of running back. I am kind of curious, what's the split's going to be? What's Malcolm Brown's role going to be? Does he come in goal line situations? Do they use him like the Rams did as a running back who has a pretty good ability to pass protect, and therefore, although doesn't have the explosiveness of a Myles Gaskin, does he play more on passing downs than you would normally expect? Those are the things that I'm looking at when it comes to Myles Gaskin and why I have him as a number 5 bust, although my ranking has him as a low-end RB2. I just see a pathway where he could be a potentially pothole running back.
I'm going to play a little devil's advocate question myself then with that, because you said we didn't see them together. We did towards the end of the season, and it was clear that Myles Gaskin was the guy. They played him over 70% of the snaps when he returned.
While Ahmed was active,
was
he wasn't 100%. He wasn't 100%
yes.
healthy. He was active. He was not 100% healthy during that time, though.
The last 3 games.
Last 3 games, correct.
Okay, so from what I understood, that he was pretty healthy. There was more so that this is clearly going to be our guy. Now, having said that, I don't argue with you strongly, because I do think the other things that you're concerned about are definitely things you need to take into consideration. Number one, Ryan Fitzpatrick is no longer the quarterback. That's a big part of it in my book, because you have an upgraded receiver, tremendous upgraded receivers, I think, in general for the Dolphins. And you don't have the same kind of check down guy that looks for his running back as much as Ryan Fitzpatrick did. And then I'll add to the fact that you do have a guy that I question the talent as well. And I also think that if there's an opportunity to upgrade, or the Dolphins struggle in any kind of capacity, I think he's going to be one of the first heads to roll in a sense. So I do think I agree with you that he's a guy that you're trying to take a chance on. His ADP, though, overall isn't too bad, because you're not really projecting him to be somebody reliant on in your team, but it is somebody that, I can see him having some opportunity not to be as productive as people expect.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. The quarterback's not an issue to me. Week 16 through 17 with Tua Tagovailoa, he was actually the RB4 during that stretch, but I have other concerns. Moving on, Chris, you have David Johnson as your number 4 bust. I can't disagree with that. Again, I have him ranked close to what his ADP is, but I can't disagree of why. I definitely see a pathway. Explain why you have him in that top 5 there.
Well, I mean, first of all, you have a situation where you have like 5,000 running backs in the backfield as it is. you got Phillip Lindsay. They added Ingram. They added Burkhead. You have a team that we both question offensively what the hell they can do in the first place, because it's basically, without Watson being the quarterback, that offense is really putrid. You have no threat of really any other receiver other than Brandon Cooks keeping people away out of the box, and then add the fact that David Johnson is basically being considered as a guy that's going to kind of continue the form he showed towards the end of the season. With all those different mouths to feed, and from my understanding, him actually being projected to play the Duke Johnson role, I think this guy has a lot of opportunity not to be successful. It's something I'm definitely avoiding. I hate this Texans team overall, fantasy-wise, other than Cooks, but I definitely am not taking David Johnson or somebody who I really want to have a target.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have him ranked at RB30, so I have him as an RB3. It's actually 4 spots technically ahead of ADP, and that's only because with the pass catching prowess and the lack thereof for the other running backs on this roster, I do believe there's a floor at the very least that comes with a David Johnson. I don't buy into the Duke Johnson narrative that he is going to be second in carries to Phillip Lindsay. I still think, at least starting the season anyway, he'll lead the way. Would I be shocked if by the end of the year Phillip Lindsay is leading the way? No, I think Phillip Lindsay is actually a decent running back and he's younger. But I think to start off the season, at least, it will be David Johnson more so, with a sprinkle of everybody else. Ultimately, though, I'm not arguing with you about the bus aspect of it, because I don't really want to touch anybody on Houston. Everybody on Houston could be a bust because of how bad this team could be, what the floor actually is on this organization, on this team this year. I would be willing to bet a lot of money that this team winds up going 0-17, quite frankly, and the only team I could ever see them beating would maybe be the Jaguars once. I think it's the only thing they even have a chance to do. So I'm not going to argue at that point too much about it. If you're drafting David Johnson, you're drafting him as a floor player to plug and play in your lineup just to get you by type of deal. There's no upside there. So that's why I'm kind of with you. I'd rather take other guys that have upside, even though I have him ranked at RB30. But that's only because of where the expected projection would take him to be based on the numbers. Don't disagree with that at all. For my number 4, I actually have Devin Singletary on there. Now, the reason for this is because his ADP is 41. My ranking on him is 46. While we actually talked about earlier in our show, because we talked about the Zack Moss injury and that could open up the door for Devin Singletary, I will say this. Devin Singletary, if he has the job all to himself because of a Zack Moss injury, will probably have RB3 ability. That's his upside. That's my point. RB3, a flex play. That's the guy's upside. And it's just a team. It's built around Josh Allen. It's pass heavy. The offensive coordinators didn't change. I don't expect the play calling to change all that much. Yes, there's some expectations that maybe they'll go to the run game a little bit more, but I don't buy it to be enough for it to really matter. And for the most part, when Moss is healthy, I expect Devin Singletary to, be the back guy for that. So he'll be in the lesser one in that committee to begin with. There's just not, again, kind of like the David Johnson thing. There's not a lot of upside here to be had. So ultimately, I'd rather have other guys in that territory who I think just have more upside than a Devin Singletary does, even though he actually has a pathway to be a starter for a few games.
Yeah, I can't argue that at all. Plus, you have quarterbacks that basically vultures your touchdown rushing, and you have a guy who is not the most big guy in the world that really utilized the red zone a lot of times and hasn't been heavily involved in the passing game. So his best attribute is his quickness, and if you're not really involved in the passing game, that kind of makes you, avoid in a situation where I don't want to necessarily touch or draft.
So let's talk about our number 3 guys. We have 2 number 3 guys that are going to be high draft picks. I have Jonathan Taylor. You have Austin Eckler. Chris, we'll start with you. Why is Austin Eckler a potential bust, your number 3 bust on the year for the running back position?
Because if you look at his statistics, he hasn't been a top RB for a couple of years now. And a big part of that reason is because his lack of touchdowns. This guy had 2 touchdowns last year. He's not heavily involved in the red zone. I don't see why that changes. You have a new coaching regime, yes, but you also have a coaching regime that loves to use Latavius Murray and loves to use that kind of hammer back in a sense. So I think we're going to talk about some of your sleepers moving forward, and we're going to see some other guys who probably will utilize more so in the red zone than he will be. He's a good pass catcher, yes. He's not Alvin Kumar. He's not one of these elite guys. And when you look at the guys who are kind of in that round 2, where he's going before some of them, like a J.K. Dobbins, where you have some guys with upside and systems that I think are better, and they're going to have opportunity to be high-scoring guys. Austin Eckler is not a guy for me that I think you should be taking in the second round, unless you're having basically there's been a run, but nothing but running backs for the first 16, 18 picks, because I just don't see the value there.
Yeah, look, I don't disagree with you. There's a pathway there. Look, my big thing about Austin Eckler kind of comes down to the injury thing. I think it's just a given with a guy in his situation that I can't expect you to play 17 games. Having said that, I have him ranked at RB 13 at the moment. His ADP is RB 10. So I am lower on him than the ADP is. I understand why people like him. I do. Because you're looking at, especially in half-point PPR leagues, you're looking at the pass-catching prowess he's going to have. You look at the fact that Joshua Kelly, Larry Roundtree, Justin Jackson, these are all very unimpressive running backs. You look at the fact that Joe Lombardi is the offensive coordinator coming from, utilizing Alvin Kamara and just the volume that you expect out of Austin Eckler. I don't think it changes much from what you've seen as far as volume-wise. Anyway, I think he's a high-end RB2. But I'm with you. The touchdowns aren't necessarily there, which is why I keep him outside of my RB1 territory, unlike the ADP does. And again, you're talking about a guy who I have listed down for a 5-to-1 injury rate ratio. So I have him playing 14 games, 3 games missed baked into his projections. And honestly, I think that's going to probably hit the head on the nail, if not even be a little bit generous as far as the games that he plays. He has not started a full season at any point in his career. The only season that he did play 16 games in, he started 8 of those games. Melvin Gordon was taking the brunt of the hits, and Austin Eckler was getting sprinkled in, as we all know. Still had a great year fantasy-wise, but in the situation where he's been a starter, has never started a full season. So that's why I keep him outside of my RB1. If you draft him inside of your top 12, then I think you might be taking a little bit more of a risk where there's other guys there. Again, I talk about this all the time. I like to play it safer in those beginning rounds. There's other guys there who I'd rather take that chance on myself. Now, I have Jonathan Taylor as my RB3 bust. I shouldn't say my RB3. As my bust RB3. He is, because he's my RB16 in my rankings, his ADP is still RB6. It didn't move with the Carson Wentz and the Quentin Nelson injury news. Now, like I said, it sounds like they're going to be back for week 1. So that part isn't going to go against him. I never moved Jonathan Taylor in my rankings no matter what the situation was, even when that injury news first came out. I already had him at 16 because I had other concerns about Jonathan Taylor. One concern being that from weeks 1 through 10, he wasn't very good. He wasn't always utilized. In fact, he was a guy that some people were talking about dropping or wanting to trade low on just to get rid of him and get him off their team. Talk to any Jonathan Taylor owner last year. Even with Marlon Mack going down, which was the best case scenario for taking Jonathan Taylor way too high, because, by the way, his ADP last year was like the 3rd round, and I warned the MD Nation to let someone else make the mistake the entire time. He wasn't that great. He wasn't seeing the holes very well. He wasn't breaking tackles. Now, towards the end, he was very good, and that's ultimately what propelled him to be an RB1 by the season's end. But again, against lesser competition. His storyline is not much different than a David Montgomery, where he just took advantage of very bad matchups, and he came through there. Now, you can say, hey, you know what? You had a matchup you should take advantage of, and you did. And I like Jonathan Taylor's talent. I don't want to get this twisted as I'm a Jonathan Taylor hater, because I'm not. But you're on a team with a Frank Reich who likes to rotate in other guys, who Nyheim Hines is going to get the majority of the passing down work on this team. Marlon Mack, I believe if he is healthy, will get sprinkled in enough to be annoying. I just think Jonathan Taylor's ceiling, volume-wise, will be capped somewhat. Even with Quentin Nelson back, this is still a banged-up offensive line, all in all. I think you're going to see a team throw the ball a bit more than they did last season. Now that you have Carson Wentz compared to Phillip Rivers. Remember back in 2018 when they had Andrew Luck, they threw the ball 650 times. They weren't a balanced team. They were a pass-first team. I think something similar could be in store for this team next year now that they have Carson Wentz. So, Chris, what do you think about Jonathan Taylor there?
Yeah, I actually had Jonathan Taylor on my bus list. I was more concerned about the injuries than you were, because you didn't move him on your board, but I definitely was, because I definitely am very concerned that you don't have Carson Wentz as your quarterback and you have Easton or Ellinger as your quarterback. I don't know how productive this guy is going to be, because they don't really have a great variety of weapons on the outside, to keep you honest. So you have an aging T.Y. Hilton, you have Pittman trying to come up. I think this guy does have concerns about, do teams trying to focus, take him away, and then you have the fact that you have Reich as the coach, who does like to kind of platoon and utilize different guys, particularly different roles. And God forbid the Colts fall behind in the game, then all of a sudden all you see is Nyheim Hines for the rest of the game. You get frustrated as a fantasy owner. So Jonathan Taylor, I like his upside, and I love his skill set, and I love his ability. I do have concerns about taking him in the 1st round, because I think this is a guy that can really cost you a couple weeks here or there, because you don't know, based on game flow or based on the coaching staff, how things are going to unfold for him.
Yeah, and that's look, Jonathan Taylor's not a 1st round pick. That's the point I'm heavily trying to make. You take him in the 2nd round, I'm not going to be mad at you. That's going to be okay, MD Nation. It's not a let someone else make that mistake situation. But when it comes to the 1st round, he ain't in the same class as the top 5 guys we talked about. I'd rather have Saquon over him. I'd rather have Aaron Jones. I'd rather have Nick Chubb. All these guys I'd rather have over a Jonathan Taylor, because even if everything goes right in his natural situation, his ceiling's still going to be capped. Plain and simple. And I like Jonathan Taylor's talent. Maybe next year, as he establishes himself as a better visual runner, maybe that'll go a long way. But I don't trust Frank Reich to just let him be the guy the way he needs to be. And that's something that has to be taken into consideration. What we're going to do now is take a quick break. When we come back on the other side, we're going to continue on and cap off our Bus 5, and then we'll have our Sleeper 5 for you guys, along with the mailbag segment. So everybody stay tuned, the Worldwide Sports Radio Network, or at Belly Up MDFF Show, and we'll be back to you right after this.
Hi, this is Terry Crews, actor, former football player, game show host, father of 5, and all-around big dude. I'm also an expert on drama. I know all kinds of drama. There's the good kind that comes with having a house full of kids. There's the bad kind, like season-ending injuries. There's the necessary kind, like having an agent in Hollywood. And there's silly drama, like the drama around my percolating pectorals. And then there's the drama you can skip.
Skip the drama that comes with not having your high school diploma or equivalency. Find free adult education classes near you and finish your high school diploma. Visit finishyourdiploma.org.
Or text diploma to 97779. Message and data rates may apply. Reply STOP to opt out. That's diploma to 97779. And leave the drama to actors like me.
Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Adopt US Kids presents Multiple Choice Parenting.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes?
How could he do this to you? And for Sheila, she has split ends.
B, console her.
Oh, sweetie, this is going to happen a lot. 4, maybe 5 more times before you get married.
C, take charge.
Got to get this all straightened out. Give a little talking to, man to man, mano a mano. Hey, Steve. It's now a good time? No? Okay, no problem. Bye.
Or D, help her find a new boyfriend?
I know a great place to meet boys. The internet. Nice, single boys. Never mind. How about some ice cream?
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
For more information on how you can adopt, visit adoptuskids.org, a public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
This is you over 30 years ago.
Are we there yet? Are we there yet?
And this is your mom when you drive her back from therapy.
Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?
Roles change without us noticing, and in your new role, we help you help. AARP gives you the information to help care for your mom so that you can have patience with her, just like she did with you. Visit aarp.org/caregiving or call 1-877-333-5885 to get practical health and wellness tips to provide even better care for your loved one.
Are we there yet?
Remember, visit aarp.org/caregiving. AARP, we help you help. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
It's the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. You're listening to the MD's Fantasy Football Show on the Worldwide Sports Radio Network.
And welcome back, MD Nation, to the show. You are listening to the MD's Fantasy Football Show on the Worldwide Sports Radio Network, WWSRN. Also presented to you by Belly Up Sports. We're streaming to you live on social media at Belly Up MDFF Show and on YouTube. Of course, check out the show if you missed it anytime that you want, or even if you didn't miss it, just to replay it and watch it again or listen to it again on your favorite pod streaming app, which you can find on iTunes, iHeart, Spotify, wherever. We are widely available to you guys everywhere because that's just our duty to you to try to help you guys win championships, make sure the information's out there, make sure you guys are making the right moves and getting your edge on the competition. We're talking about our best five, bust five, sleeper five running backs halfway through the bust five. Got the sleeper five on deck. And of course, the mailbag segment for you at the end. As your host, Dan Mader and Chris Dowhower, got to intro us, of course, again. And we have our sponsor for the second half of today's show, which is Monkey Knife Fight. And they're a daily fantasy sports gaming website with a number of unique ways to win money on your favorite sports and players. It's a mix of daily fantasy and prop games. So download the app. Go to monkeyknifefight.com with the promo code BELLYUP for a $1 match on your deposit of up to $100. That's an additional $100 for free that you could play with today when you sign up for the monkeyknifefight.com app or on your favorite Play Store. So again, just use the BELLYUP code, get a $100 deposit bonus today on that. All right, Chris, so we're talking about our best five, bust five, sleeper five guys. We got halfway through, or a little more than halfway through, our bust five running backs. Let's get to our top two. Our top two are kind of the same. I specified it being Ronald Jones because of his ADP. You went with the Tampa Bay running backs in general. So why are all the Tampa Bay running backs a bust in your eyes?
Because I've heard this narrative that, people, depending on who you like more, do you like Fournette more, do you like Ronald Jones more, that's who you kind of target. I don't think you target any of these guys in the backfield. I think that it's going to be basically butchering each other, a reincarnation of the New England situations years ago, San Francisco situation a couple of years ago, and the Rams situation last year, where you never knew who to play, you never knew what the matchup was going to bring out, and you never knew what the coaching staff was going to do. And then add the fact that you have a coaching staff that loves to pass the ball, a healthy Tom Brady and all the weapons they have in the passing game, add Giovanni Bernard into the mix for another guy to be a clear-cut pass catcher, which was, something that Tampa Bay Fournette was able to be utilized in some ways last year when Ronald Jones was with him in the backfield. I think you just have too many question marks to want any of these guys because it's not obvious to the coaching staff even once how the hell you're supposed to draft somebody for you in your fantasy league.
Yeah. Look, ultimately, I'm with you. I don't really want a Tampa Bay running back, period. The only reason I specify in mind that it's Ronald Jones is because Leonard Fournette is going in a territory which I think is fine. He's going at like 10th round territory where you're taking a shot on a guy who is going to be involved, who's going to be on the field as a running back. That's the only reason why I say, okay, fine. I'm fine with where Leonard Fournette is. I have him ranked about where he's being drafted. The reason I specify Ronald Jones, because this is the guy who's going entirely too high. His ADP is RB31. ECR, expert consensus ranking, is RB32. I'm out on both the public and the other experts in the industry. I have him ranked as RB45. I don't see a pathway where this guy is truly a mid-level RB3, essentially, because of all the reasons you just talked about. Leonard Fournette's going to be involved. Still really not 100% clear who's going to be the lead guy, whether it's Ronald Jones or Leonard Fournette. And then let's add in the fact that because both of these guys actually had somewhat of a floor because they had about 45 targets apiece last season, you had in Giovanni Bernard, who I do believe will have a big involvement in the passing game and take that floor away. So you might have legitimately 3 guys regularly involved in this team. That's why ultimately I don't want any of them, but Ronald Jones especially, he's going way too high if you actually think, because you're talking about mid-level RB3, you're talking about a guy who's should be in your flex conversation any given week. No way. No way do I have Ronald Jones in my flex conversation. So that's why I specify Ronald Jones as my number 2 bust. But ultimately, I'm with you the whole backfield. I'd rather not touch if I can help it. So let's go to our number 1 bust, Chris, from the same team, but different players. So actually, I'm not going to hit. I was thinking about hitting the debate button, but I don't know if I have a strong enough debate case to hit you with Travis Etienne. So talk about why Travis Etienne is your RB1 bust.
Well, I see Robinson as yours, but I think you do have the narrative coming out of the Jacksonville, coaching staff that there's going to be a featured running back, more so than one of the bruisers between Carlos Hyde and James Robinson. Etienne does have the first round pick invested in him, so you would think he had an opportunity to kind of be that guy, especially as the season progresses. But I don't necessarily agree with that, because you look at the coaching staff in general, they traditionally like to use more of the physical backs. They like to have that guy kind of get you the 3 yards in a cloud of dust. I think Etienne's going to be kind of a luxury for this offense, and he might be utilized as in the passing game, but I don't think it's going to be consistent enough or even something you can project well enough to be taking him in the first 7-8 rounds. I think he's going way higher than that quite often in most drafts. And for me, Etienne's the guy that I'm not going to necessarily stick my neck out, particularly when there's people going after him like a Michael Carter, a Javonte Williams, etc., where I think these guys have more of a clear-cut opportunity to be starters or have, early on have touches, versus Etienne, where you're kind of hoping there's manufactured touches for him when you have a Chenault, when you have a Shark, you have a Marvin Jones. So I think there's a lot of things kind of that have to work his way for him to be effective and be utilized in your lineup, where I'm not going to take that chance that early.
I don't disagree with you on the points of he is being ranked, drafted based on logically what he should be as a first-round running back and logically what he could be. And I have him ranked at 27, which is actually a spot or 2 below the ADP, which has it about RB 25, I believe. Pretty much what it boils down to is this. You're talking about a half-point PPR standpoint. We have gotten the notion that he will definitely be the pass-catching back. That is the one thing that has been consistent from this coaching staff. I believe that it will be the case. He is the most explosive back. So he has that floor. Targets are worth more than carries at the end of the day. So even if this turns into a DeAndre Swift situation, let's say last year, where Swift didn't really get involved or wasn't the lead carry guy until about week 14, but you got like 5 targets a game. He was still an RB3 during that time period before he took over. So that's kind of what
touchdowns you need, though. That's going to be the crucial difference. But go ahead.
Well, I don't think it's going to be much different. I think that was the point I was going to get to, because this is going to be a shotgun-based team. I think they're going to be running shotgun quite a bit in the red zone area. Maybe not inside the 5, but inside the 20. Yeah. So I think he does have a situation to do something similar to a DeAndre Swift last year, which is why I don't discount him there. And because he is the most explosive running back, because they did invest a first-round draft capital into him, I still think there's a pathway for him to overtake a James Robinson at some point during this season. Especially, he'll definitely do it next year, 2022. I think that's no doubt. But I think there's a chance that he will do it this season towards the end. That's why, on the flip side, I have James Robinson as my number 1 bust. Mostly because of this. And I think, Chris, this part, I think you'll agree with me on. His ADP is RB22. His ECR is RB31. I have him ranked at RB41. So, I mean, just hit me with your quick sentence on the idea that his ADP is RB22. I mean, you disagree with that, right?
Yeah, I think that's too high. I mean, I think James Robinson has some value more so than some people think, but I don't think he should be ranked that high.
He's not an RB22 at the end of the draft. He has no passing upside to maintain his floor. I don't know how often Jacksonville will be in the red zone area inside the 5, inside the 10, which is where he's going to need to be. And even then, because his coaching staff is so unpredictable, is it him or Carlos Hyde getting the goal line carries? I think that can be a question in and of itself. So there's just too much of a floor with a James Robinson. That's why I have him ranked at RB41, even if he's leading the way in carries over Travis Etienne for the first half of the season. It does not matter. He has no floor. The reason why he was a fantasy gold mine last year was because of volume. He wasn't efficient. It wasn't anything great about his game. He doesn't have an off-the-chart athletic skill set. He had volume in both rushing and passing. You take away the passing, you're talking about a guy to me who's not even an RB3. So the fact that he's being drafted as a low-end RB2, Empty Nation, say it with me. Let someone else make that mistake on James Robinson. But maybe one thing you want to take out of this between me and Chris is, maybe you just don't target a Jacksonville running back, and I can't be mad at you about that either. Let's move into our sleeper
Just don't
5.
reach on one.
Well, yeah, don't reach on one. And that's always the key, right? Don't reach on any player. Ultimately speaking, that is the main thing that you want to stay away from. So let's talk about our sleeper 5. Let's talk about our exciting guys, the guys that we love their value at. You started off, maybe not the quote-unquote typical prototype sleeper type, but I still see why you're going with this guy. David Montgomery is your number 5.
Yeah, David Montgomery is going around the end of the third, beginning of the 4th round right now. Ahead of, behind a lot of other guys. This guy was RB4 last year, and you want to go by week to week, he was RB9 from average wise. So there's no reason he shouldn't be considered still one of the top running backs to target. I talked about my not being a big fan of Austin Eckler, who was going with 2 rounds ahead of him right now. So I think that, to me, David Montgomery is kind of being forgotten about. And I think that he has one of those guys who is upside as the season progresses as well. We saw that last year. And I think when Josh Fields takes over the quarterback, you and I kind of have a similar viewpoint that when there's a mobile quarterback there. Sorry, I messed that up. Justin Fields, when he becomes quarterback, he tends to usually benefit the running back by almost a full yard per carry in a sense, because that running threat at the quarterback position makes that different, guys ends, the tackles not be able to just kind of come up the field the way they want to. He was utilized in the passing game. Tariq Cohen's still not healthy. Damian Williams has a little bit concerned, but Damian Williams was never somebody who's been heavily utilized. And even when Nagy was the coach and then Williams was there back in the Kansas City days, it wasn't a guy that was necessarily one of his favorites. So I think there's no reason that Montgomery won't continue to be one of the top running backs to target. And I'm kind of surprised that people kind of written him off, not written him off, but kind of have him far down behind other running backs as they do.
Well, I don't know if that's actually the case, and that's why it doesn't really make my sleeper or bust in any scenario. His ADP right now is RB17. I think that's where he belongs. I actually have him
finished 4 last year, just by the way. Finished 4.
I have him ranked at RB22, so I'm even lower than the ADP is on him. It's not David Montgomery. I like David Montgomery. I do. I have a problem with him trying to start Andy Dalton beginning the season. And while I agree with you, Justin Fields will eventually take over. It's anybody's guess when exactly that will truly be. Hopefully earlier than later, which would propel well to David Montgomery's side, but it is a concern of mine. I don't trust Matt Nagy's my new Adam Gase. I don't trust anything he does, especially as long as he's the play caller, and that includes when David Montgomery's on the field. You hit it on the head with the Tariq Cohen analysis of where is he at health-wise. If he's not healthy, this could play out well, but when Tariq Cohen's healthy, he dominates the passing targets under Matt Nagy's play calling.
So just to clarify for that real quick, through 3 games that Tariq Cohen was healthy last year, David Montgomery had the same amount of targets. Through 2 games, Tariq Cohen only had 3 total targets. He had 1 and he had 2. He finished with catches. And he had 3 catches the last game, 6 targets. So they had the exact amount of same targets overall, and Montgomery was more effective week to week, where he got 3-3-3. And Cohen, on a game they basically were losing to Atlanta, had to come back and became a totally pass-happy team that game, had his best target-wise with 6 targets and only had 3 catches. So that narrative, I think, is something that's changed and already changed last year when Nagy was the coach for the first 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think you're overlooking the big fact there, which is the quarterback play. The target-wise, it was a 75-25 split between Tariq Cohen and David Montgomery as far as targets go in those first 3 weeks. The reception thing, while you're right about that, had more to do with the shoddy quarterback play. And say what you will about Andy Dalton, as much as I think it should be Justin Fields, he's still better than Mitchell Trubisky or Nick Foles out there. So that's where I think the difference
They both had
is
9 targets. I'm confused by the 75-25.
No, that's no. The first 3 weeks, it was a 75-25 split between Tariq Cohen and David Montgomery. That's.
I mean, in passing downs, you mean?
No,
or you mean targets wise? Because he had 1 and 2 targets, so he had 3 targets through the first 2 games, I should say, and he had 6 in game 3. Montgomery had 3 targets, 3 targets, and 3 targets, so it's 9. So both of them had 9 through 3 games.
I'm going to look this up right now. I'm pretty sure you're wrong. I have it in my notes as a 75-25 split as far as the targets go. But my point is more with this than anything else. I don't trust Matt Nagy. I don't trust that offensive line. And my thing is this. I think David Montgomery has a good amount of value. I think he is an RB2. I think there is an upside there. The reason why he's not a sleeper for me, though, is that you can't draft him any higher than he's being drafted right now anyway as the RB17.
I definitely think you can. He finished 4th and he's 9th on per game basis.
Finished 4th, but remember, the reason he finished 4th is 2 reasons. Bill Lazor took over the play calling. So if you tell me Bill Lazor is going to take over the play calling early on in the season, then maybe we have an argument there. But took over the play calling and played against the worst defenses in the NFL when it came to run defense.
I can't argue the Nagy fact. You know that I'm not a Matt Nagy apologist. I think he sucks. I don't think he should ever be involved in the play calling. But even he showed me in the beginning of the season, he realized who the top running back in that backfield was.
And I'll say this. He has made a point to say that David Montgomery will get 20 carries a game, which again, we talk about, it's not going to happen. But the other factor is this. When Tariq Cohen went down, and I think this is a big part of his upside and his potential too. When Tariq Cohen went down, there's nobody else to go to. The fact that they have Damian Williams, who I do think if something were to happen to Cohen would be then involved in the passing game in his own right, keeps the cap on the possibility that Montgomery will be able to just take over completely. It was with Damian Williams there. I don't think they signed him to that 1-year deal to bring him in to not be utilized if they find themselves in a similar situation. The other problem is Tariq Cohen's contract. He gets paid too much to get left out. So if he is active on the field, I think Nagy's going to have this feeling that he needs to get them more involved.
Have you found your stat yet? Because I know I've found my stats before.
I'm still working on that, but no, this thing just kicked me off. Talk about what I just said to you there about the contract of Tariq Cohen.
I'm not worried about it. They had that contract last year. Like I said, for the first 3 games, he wasn't utilized the way that people seem to think that he was being in the passing game. The year before, absolutely, don't question that. Last year, you didn't see a gigantic difference when they both were healthy. The only game that you did see it was the Atlanta game, and that was because they fell behind by so many points. I think David Montgomery showed last year that he should be the guy, and they drafted him to be the guy. And while I'm kind of concerned about Damian Williams getting some touches, which every running back kind of shares some touches, I'm not worried about him necessarily stealing the passing game or stealing anything from Montgomery. I think this helps him kind of be more healthy, and as the season progresses, continue to be effective. So I actually look at it as a kind of a blessing having a little guy. They had Cordell Patterson last year. From everything I had heard camp-wise, they were planning on using Damian Williams in the Cordell Patterson role, which basically is you play a couple snaps here or there.
So I made a mistake in my notes. You're right. They did both ultimately had 9 targets over the first 3 weeks. Tariq Cohen had 6 targets. 2019, there was a 75-25 split between Tariq Cohen and David Montgomery when it came to the targets. That was my note. That was my mistake. But that's where they had the big split as far as the target share goes, and that's what I get concerned about. Moving off of David Montgomery, again, I like him with the upside. I think there's a reason why he should be drafted as an RB2 there. I don't think he's a sleeper at that standpoint, but we'll see exactly what happens. Maybe he'll be one of our bet guys that we're going to do an episode on later on before the season. He'll be better than Austin Eckler, which I put up the wrong graphic, so thanks for pointing that out. Anyway, I have Latavius Murray as my number 5. And the reason why Latavius Murray is my number 5 guy is because how involved I believe this backfield is just going to be in general when it comes to the Saints. I talked about before, Alvin Kumar is my big guy because the whole offense is going to revolve around him and where he goes. But to back that point up, I think Latavius Murray is going to be on the field quite a bit too. I think you're talking about a guy who might be looking at 12 plus carries a game, and he's done it in the past. he's been a flex guy. And that's kind of where it builds into him being one of my sleeper candidates because of where he's being drafted compared to the value that he gives you. First of all, we all know that if Alvin Kumar goes down, this is Latavius Murray's show, he's one of the top end handcuffs that you could possibly own. That's number one. But his ADP is 46. I have him ranked as RB 38. If Alvin Kamara has to get utilized in a ton of different ways and maybe line up in the slot or whatever they're going to do, it means both him and Murray are going to be on the field at the same time. I like Latavius Murray's talent, especially on this offensive line with this team. He has touchdown upside, especially with Jameis Winston. I just think he's a guy who's going much lower than what his value actually is.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think Latavius Murray is somebody that people seem to have forgotten about and are reaching on a lot of the running backs around there, or even before that. This guy's still going to be heavily involved in the offense. He's not going to go away. Alvin Kamara is not going to all of a sudden get 300 carries. So I do think Latavius Murray definitely has some great value.
Moving on here to our next sleeper talents, you have Joe Mixon as your sleeper. Again, not the prototypical sleeper, but I'm sure you're making the point of you have him ranked a lot higher than what he is going. Where do you have him ranked exactly, Chris, would be my question.
I have Joe Mixon in discussion as a borderline first rounder, depending on what your pick is. I have him around 8. I still have kind of movement going on in that range, but I do think that right now, for me, he's starting to move ahead of Jonathan Taylor, who I had Jonathan Taylor originally slotted ahead of him. I think that Mixon, to me, is a guy, especially with the Joe Burrow news we kind of kicked the show off with, is going to be the primary face in the offense and featured more and more. And I kind of look at the Todd Gurley role that the Rams used, Todd Gurley's role on the Rams a couple of years ago. And I think Mixon has opportunity to kind of explode like that. I think him being utilized in all, both facets of the game with Gio moving on and him having basically the kind of offense run, featuring him a lot of ways, I think has opportunity to really have some upside. And I think the offensive line does improve a little bit. I don't love all their moves, but I do think Reef's better than what they had last year. I do think Jackson will be a better guard than they had last year. So I think some of them have more beefiness up front. And the guy was basically RB9 when he was healthy for the first 8-9 weeks. So he's a guy that I think that people are kind of, assuming is just going to do what he does and not necessarily, don't want to look at Joe Mixon. But for me, if you're looking at Antonio Gibson, you're looking at Jonathan Taylor, is somebody I would rather take over those two guys than I think then a lot of people are looking at the opposite way, or especially even Austin Eckler, who's ranked ahead of him right now in ADP.
So you're saying from this standpoint of you believe Joe Mixon is worthy of a late first round pick?
I think he should be in that discussion, yes. I think he's definitely obviously a guy you should take. If you're coming back on that early second round, he should be one of the top running backs coming off the board there.
I mean, I don't disagree with that standpoint. I have Joe Mixon ranked as RB12, which is only one spot ahead of the ADP at the moment, and is actually the same where ECR has him ranked. I have his injury rate baked into his projection, which is why he wants to be RB12, which is why I'm 4 spots lower than you, apparently, when it comes to Joe Mixon. I don't have anything bad about it. Again, the only thing to get in his way is his health. That's it. And I think you can make a good case as to why, maybe he won't have as much issues in that front, because they did play it safe with him last year. I mean, if anything, you'd have to expect, given that he was week to week, but yet never played a season ago, you have to expect that the team ultimately just made a decision because they were out of the playoff. There's no reason to throw him out there, that he should have every reason in the world to be 100% healthy this season coming up to it. So I don't dispute that any kind of way. Again, for me, the only difference would be I have him ranked at 12. His ADP is 13. I think he's actually going.
Well, that's the running back position. I think that for me, he could be arguably top 10, but ADP wise, he's going, I think, 19, which is late second round, early third round. That's where I think he's fallen too far.
And I would lead with, I think he belongs there as well, because I don't want to take too many risks with my early second round pick. Again, I go back to, I don't want to lose my draft early on. I want to be able to stabilize and then win my draft later. I think being that he would be a late end second round properly bakes in the injury risk that is a Joe Mixon. Because remember, the last 2 years, he's been a fantasy disappointment, frankly, at the end of the day.
So would you take Gibson and Eckler ahead of him?
Gibson, yes. I have Eckler ranked 1 spot below Joe Mixon. So that's about the range that we're talking about, though. I would have him mixed in with those guys. Moving on, I have Joshua Kelly as my number 4. This is I have him ranked much higher in ADP, first and foremost. I have him ranked at 59, and his ADP right now is 73. Now, I want to lead with this. I'm not super excited about Joshua Kelly, but if you're talking about a deep sleeper in your double-digit rounds, somebody besides Austin Eckler is going to get worked into this offense. Kind of like Anthony Lynn Lombardi has the history of having two backs, of having a quote-unquote bigger physical type of back to go with his pass-catching guy. We've talked about this. Austin Eckler, reason why you have him as one of your busts, you don't believe he's going to be very involved in the red zone. This is kind of why I have Joshua Kelly as one of my sleeper guys, because somebody's going to be. And I do believe it's going to be Kelly over Larry Roundtree, although I wasn't impressed by Kelly last year. Just athletically, Kelly still blows Larry Roundtree out of the water, and I still think they're going to give him the shot over Roundtree to start off the season. So here's my argument why he's a sleeper. If he can be a little bit better than what he was last year and actually convert in the red zone, you're talking about a guy who he'll be touchdown, boom, or bust, but maybe works his way into potentially being an RB3 because of the touchdown work that he could potentially get. So that's why I have Joshua Kelly there as a deep sleeper in double-digit rounds who has a pathway of production to fantasy relevancy.
Or he could get cut.
But that hasn't been the reports out of camp. The reports out of camp has been it's still leaning more towards Justin Jackson being the one who gets cut. And that
I've actually heard Justin Jackson actually been pressing, and they're thinking about more and more keeping him because he's actually one of the few guys that has more explosiveness than the other guy. If you lose Eckler, they don't have any explosiveness in the backfield, and they like Jackson. They liked how he's been productive when he was out there, just healthy. It was the biggest concerns. While Joshua Kelly, somebody they're kind of just more down on overall.
And there are reports of the exact opposite where they confirm what you're saying as far as explosiveness goes, but because he gets paid more than the other guys, because he is never healthy, he is still very much on the roster bubble himself. Look, I'm not making an argument here that Kelly's definitely not going to get cut. Somebody is of these three, and it could be any one of them. But Justin Jackson also does not fit the mold I think Joe Lombardi is going to have on this team, which is going to have a bigger physical back on this team. And I believe Joshua Kelly, it will be Joshua Kelly, not Larry Roundtree. And it won't, even if Justin Jackson stays on the roster, he's not going to be the guy getting the goal line touches over anybody. That'll be one of these bigger backs. So that's why I have Kelly there as a deep sleeper. Again, we're talking about a guy that you're taking a shot on. I just see a pathway if he can convert in his goal line situations. So let's move on to our next sleeper group, which would be, I have Jamal Williams, number 3. You had Damien Harris as your number 3 sleeper. So speak to that of why you think Damien Harris is undervalued right now.
I think Damian Harris has the opportunity to be the clear number 1 back in New England, which is a huge change from most of the past. He kind of took this step last year and started solidifying as the back guy. There's talk about them moving on from Sonny Michel, even though he's still on the roster currently. He has been more utilized in camp, at least right now, in the passing game. And you have Rex Burkhardt, who's moved on. And with Rex Burkhardt moving on, that's 6 touchdowns, and that's about 25 to 30 catches available. So they did have White last year, so I'm not trying to argue that they didn't have White. He's not going to be heavily involved in the passing game. But there is an opportunity for somebody to kind of fill the role of the Rex Burkhead role that was missing now in that New England offense, which, like I said, 6 touchdowns and about 25 catches. So you add that to Damian Harris's potential. You add that to Cam Newton, we both agree, is going to have a better year than he had last year. The offensive line is more improved. They have a good tight end, two good tight ends, and an overall offense that should be more improved just from talent-wise. And then the defense that should be better than it had last year as well. They'll have more opportunity to get some turnovers, some easy touchdowns. I like Damian Harris this year. I think he has upside to be a really good back, good productive, average 5 yards per carry. I think there's no reason that he can't be more involved in some capacity. I don't think he's clearly going to just be the Sonny Michel role where he just only runs the ball. I think he'll get a couple. He does do good pass protection. Even Belichick came out and talked about how he's been really excelling in all 3 phases. So I do think this is something that I kind of hope for Damian Harris. And right now where he's going, he's basically going not far from where Zack Moss is. We both talked about Zack Moss in that backfield. Is that something you even want to kind of look at? To me, Damian Harris is definitely a guy that I have on my board and higher than the ADP is going right now.
His ADP is 32, running back 32 at the moment. I have him ranked at RB 31. So I think he's getting valued relatively correctly. I think you're being very, very generous when you say, let's add Rex Burkhead stats to Damian Harris. He's not going to be involved in the passing game. As long as now, if Mac Jones was a starting quarterback, I think we'd have a much more interesting conversation here as far as that goes. But because it's Cam Newton, I don't think there's just going to be a ton of pass attempts to the running back position in general. And it is going to be.
Who was running back last year? Who was quarterback last year?
It was Cam, and James White dominated targets.
But Rex Burkhead still had 25 catches. And 6
Agreed, but why would that go to Damian Harris? Why would that not just go to James White? That's what doesn't make any sense to me.
So why did they go Rex Burkhead in the first place?
because they like to sprinkle in Rex Burkhead. But if you don't have Rex Burkhead,
my point is that there's an opportunity to have a guy that you're going to have more of a slim down backfield. So I don't think James White automatically gets all those catches because he's going to be out there more often. I think you're going to have equally his usage. His usage isn't going to change necessarily. I don't think he's not going to play 95% of the snaps that they pass the ball. I think you're going to see him still be out there for the most part like he was last year. But there's still some opportunity for somebody else to kind of fill in that role and kind of have a couple catches here or there or score some touchdowns. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't think you have any basis on why that would go to Damien Harris and not James White as far as the passing targets go. When Rex Burkhead went down, we have an example of this. When Rex Burkhead went down, it was all James White in the passing game. It wasn't Damian Harris. He wasn't involved. It wasn't Sony Michel. And as far as the Belichick narrative goes, as far as Damian Harris being more involved in the pass game, he said the same thing about Sony Michel the first 2 years, and he wasn't at all. This team, as long as James White is on this team, it will kill Damian Harris's ability to catch the ball. He has the ability to catch the ball. He should be catching the ball. He should be more involved in that. But I don't believe for 1 second that's going to be the case. I think he is your prototypical RB3 because I think he is a good rusher. He will. I'm sorry, Michelle, I have to believe he's going to get cut. But even if he doesn't, this is Damian Harris's backfield as far as the carries go. This is a team that's going to be heavily in the red zone and efficient in that aspect of it. But he's your typical RB3 with not much of a ceiling because of the lack of pass work, and we'll have some floor games, but he's going to be a guy that you can play in your flex play, get by with it. I don't see a ton of upside unless something were to just drastically change, like Mac Jones taking over this job earlier on in the season or James White getting hurt. That's what it would take for me for Damian Harris. So I think he's actually valued right where he should go. And that's just, we'll see exactly what happens throughout the season. Again, we'll keep these things in mind for our bet show that's going to come in early September. Moving on to our next sleeper. I have Jamal Williams as number 3. Now, this is pretty basic as to why I have him as number 3 sleeper. One, I think he's somebody who is not just a handcuff, because I do believe I have him getting about 40% of the work to DeAndre Swift's 60% of the work when they're both healthy. So I think he's a guy who's involved on a week-to-week basis. Not that you want to play him in those situations, but we talk about this. Swift's dealing with a groin injury. He has concussion injury history. So Williams in a position where, like last year when he found himself in a few games, he could be the lead back for a few games. And in the games in which he was the lead back last year for Aaron Jones, week 7 through 8, he was the RB4 during that time period. So he's a guy who's shown that if you're just going to give him all the volume, he can produce high-end running back type of numbers. And right now, his ADP is 45. I have him ranked as RB 35. I think he's going to finish as a top 3 running back this year. A guy that I have no problem drafting, even though he's quote unquote a handcuff, but I think it's a little bit more than that in that 9th round territory, and feeling pretty good that you're going to have a couple games of upside.
Yeah, so in that same round, like I said, I'd rather have Damien Harris over him, but I don't disagree. He has some sleeper value, absolutely.
Moving on a little bit more, I have Raheem Mostert, my number 2. You have Chase Edmonds. I like the Chase Edmonds pick. Why have Chase Edmonds as your number 2 sleeper?
I don't buy the narrative that James Conner is going to be Kenny and Drake. I think that Conner was brought in a different contract than Drake was paid last year. I think Conner's best days are kind of behind him. I think there will be a split, but Edmonds is very effective even with Drake last year. He's definitely always involved in the passing game. I think that doesn't change at all. And I think you're going to see a little bit more carries out of him. You don't need a whole significant lot more out of Chase Edmonds than you were getting last year. He was a valuable flex play. On 62% of the time, he was an RB3 last year when he played. So I think when you look at his production, it's already kind of in place. You expect a little bit of a jump. I think the offense will be better in general, and I think he'll have a little more carries because I think Drake was, basically had to prove his contract last year. There was a commitment to make sure that he was out there. It was a commitment to make sure he got his touches. But I think that James Conner doesn't have that same thing tied to him. I think Edmonds is clearly the more explosive, better player in the backfield.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. I have him ranked one spot of his ahead of his ADP. I have him at 26. His ADP is 27. But that's more a reflection of protecting myself in where you draft him. I think where he's being drafted is okay, but I'm with you on what the upside is of a Chase Edmonds, where I don't buy that if James Conner's inefficient, they're not just going to keep running him out there the way they did Kenny and Drake because of what Drake's contract was like. And I think Edmonds has that upside. He's shown explosibility before. He's going to have the floor of the passing attack throughout the entire season. It's just going to be a matter of, can he hold up with added workload can he be efficient with those carries? Because he did have some situations where he had a game where he wasn't the most efficient guy when he actually had the opportunity to carry the workload. So I think it's a question of we haven't seen it yet, which is why I have him ranked at RB26, but there is definitely an upside when it comes to Chase Edmonds, and I do like his talent quite a bit. As far as mine, with Raheem Mostert being my number 2 sleeper, again, this has more to do with where I have him ranked in his ADP. His ADP is 29. I have him ranked as 25. This is just a guy who can give you RB1 type production any given week. And especially when you talk about all the time, these guys going, zero running back or modified zero running back. He's just that guy for me that you're going to take, going into it, you're not going to have him for all 17 games, which is what's baked into his value here. So I have him ranked at RB25. But at RB25, those games that you do get, you have RB1 upside any given week because of that system, because of what he can give you. So I think the fact that this guy's been going consistently in the 7th, 8th round territory to me is a steal. I think he's worth that 6th round pick, quite frankly. Weeks 1 through 2 last year was the RB6. Weeks 5 through 6 was the RB18. Weeks 12 through 15, RB37. That's when they started sprinkling in guys like Jeff Wilson, even when he was playing. But he's that guy who just has the ultimate boom or bust potential for you. And he's also represents that area where there's a big drop off at running back, which is another reason why I think you'd be better off taking him a round or 2 earlier than most people are going.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the ADP, like you said, he's right now is RB27. So I think that's pretty fair. I don't know. I do agree with the roundage wise. I was kind of putting the Chase Edmonds thing out there. I think Chase Edmonds is going around the same round that Raheem Mostert is right now. So I think that for me, I think there's other guys who had my value, but I think Raheem Mostert is basically being forgotten about. So I don't disagree that it's somebody that people shouldn't be forgetting about. And you have opportunity to kind of have as your 4th running back as a great player, especially in the beginning of the season. I do think he loses his job as the season progresses. I do think that they brought in Sermon as the guy to be the replacement. And then he's not really heavily involved in the passing game. We've kind of seen that in the past years. So I think Raheem Mostert does have some upside, particularly their early season schedule. They play Detroit week 1. So I think he's somebody you shouldn't be forgetting about, but I think his ADP is not too bad.
Let's move on to our number 1. We both have the same number 1. Something we agree on, Chris. We agree on Michael Carter as the number 1 sleeper running back on our boards. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to name some of the guys that they have going ahead of him. Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones right now are going before he is. Moser, Mike
Terrible
Davis,
mistake.
Melvin Gordon, Travis Etienne, go on and on. James Robinson. I mean, you just go down the list of all these different guys who I have a lot of question marks about, and I don't understand why somebody who clearly is the most talented backfield on the Jets, they clearly have upgraded offensive line, particularly on the left side where you have Becton and Tucker. You added a Moses, the right tackle. You have a young quarterback who has decent legs. You have pretty decent weapons on the outside, and you play in a division where you have to kind of score points. I don't see why Davis is going. These guys doesn't have not Davis. Well, my boy, I should say, doesn't have opportunity to be. Michael Carter shouldn't be somebody that you're looking for and just have way higher value of. I think he's getting kind of not because he was one of the last running backs to kind of come off the board in this year's draft, and I think maybe that's what the concern is. He's only their 4th round pick, but we've seen other 4th rounders explode into the scenes, and because their talent has basically been better than anybody else is out there, and he's in a similar situation. He's better than Tevin Coleman. He's better than Ty Johnson. Samaje Perine's nobody. So I mean, look at the rest of the guys they have around him. You look like he should be the guy, and they should be utilizing him in the passing game because he is best pass catcher and has been, for a while now. At college, this guy was highly explosive. He was able to be utilized even as a tandem back, was still productive. So even if you are questioning is he going to get 20 touches, it doesn't matter. With 15 touches, he's still going to be productive.
That's the point, is that in this system, first of all, it fits in perfectly. There's a better offensive line that people want to give the Jets credit for. They're going to want to protect their rookie quarterback, which means leaning on the running game, which is already going to be the emphasis for this system again anyway. And he's not a guy who needs a ton of touches to be super effective. He is going to be the number 1 pass catcher of this team. He's an explosive type of runner. So guys like Tevin Coleman, Ty Johnson, they can get sprinkled in, and Michael Carter can still give you upside. I have him ranked at RB28. His ADP is RB35. But he could be, I wouldn't be shocked if this guy finishes as an RB2, finishes inside the top 24, quite frankly. I'm big on Michael Carter, just like you are. Definitely one of the top sleepers on my board, given the circumstances and situations. This is not your same old Jets regime, guys. It's not your same old Jets regime. This is a new team, new look, new faces, new scheme. And there's some guys to be excited about, especially Michael Carter on this team. That was our best 5, bust 5, sleeper 5 running backs. So now, guys, guess what time it is?
The mail's here.
That's right. The mail's here. Remember, if you ever want to get on the mailbag segment, all you got to do is hit us up at BellyUpMDFF Show on social media. No matter what, even if we don't pick your question out, we're still going to give you an answer. We're still going to help you guys out, but we'll pick out our favorite ones and talk about them on the show. So to kick this thing off, we got Lyle. He asked Nick Chubb or Austin Eckler in PPR. I guess you guys can guess where we're going to go with this.
I mean, I think it's pretty obvious where I stand on that one. Even Eckler's, ability to be used in the passing game, I definitely think with Chubb's, that's kind of something you're kind of worried about for him. His production just outshines Eckler overall, so I go with Nick Chubb.
Nick Chubb is the lighter version of Derrick Henry, where even in PPR leagues, because he's such an effective runner, he's such a superstar runner, that he's still going to be an RB1 even in full-point PPR leagues. I have him as RB8 in a full-point PPR league compared to Austin Eckler at RB13. I definitely would go with Nick Chubb myself, too.
And just real quick, on a per-game basis, Nick Chubb actually had a better PPR per game than Eckler did last year in PPR leagues.
Well, the big difference is he scores touchdowns, unlike Austin Eckler, and that still counts for something even in PPR, believe it or not. Izzy, he asks, are you guys moving your playoff weeks to week 15 through 17? Now there's an 18-week schedule.
Izzy, I hope the hell not, because I'm not a big fan of the 2-week playoffs. And I definitely don't know about 15 to 17. I'm trying to understand as that 3 weeks playoffs you're looking at, but I don't like that long.
No, I don't think he's suggesting 2-week playoffs. Weeks 15 through 17, that would be 3 weeks.
So 3-week playoff then.
Yeah, I mean just like typical playoffs before weeks 14, 16, and
I'm sorry.
Weeks 14, 15, and 16 was your typical playoff weeks before. He's asking, are you just going to move that a week later, or are you going to do, week 15 and 16 as one playoff game, week 17 and 18 as one playoff game? He's asking which one are you going to do now there's an extra week.
Oh, I would keep the same format that I've had. There's no reason to change it, in my opinion. I think that you want to just knock off the one game, just move it a game back, basically. I don't think that last game you had some concerns people are going to be sat or being rested for playoffs, depending on who's, how seeding is kind of going. So I think you just kind of move, back 1 week. That's all I would do.
Yeah, I'm with you. Again, the reason why I always call it the amateur hour league when it was the week 17 championships to begin with is because you don't know who the hell is going to play week 17. Your superstars might be sitting the bench because the team's already set up for, home field advantage throughout the playoffs. It's not going to change in week 18. So that's why I never believed in championship weeks should have been week 17 to begin with. I especially hate the 2-week matchup playoff because it doesn't reflect anything. Your entire season is based on who wins any given Sunday. That's how the NFL does it. It's how fantasy football does it. Why are we changing formats, completely change the game come playoff time? It never made any sense to me. So yes, I know in our leagues, Chris, that we're in together, we're just going to be moving it 1 week back. So the regular season will end in week 14 instead of week 13. So there'll be an extra regular season game, but the playoffs will be weeks 15, 16, and 17. And I think that's how it's going to be for most leagues out there. Jen, she asked me, in a non-PPR league, would you go with Josh Jacobs or Chris Carson?
This one was really tough for me, Jen. There's not a whole lot, I think, other than kind of my preference. I would probably go with Jacobs, actually. He had more production over 20-point games than Chris Carson did last year. He was healthier last year. And overall, I think that he just had more explosive, more upside, and a better floor. Carson had, I think it was 5 games under in single digits points, I believe. And Jacobs had 6, but he played in 3 or more games. So overall, you saw the more upside out of Jacobs, by far, and you saw a more consistent floor by Jacobs as well. So I go with Jacobs.
I have Chris Carson in standard leagues ranked literally 1 spot ahead of Josh Jacobs. So I have these guys neck and neck with each other. The reason I have him 1 spot is because I think with Kenyon Drake there, I don't think it's just the passing work we're talking about that Kenyon Drake's going to steal away. I think he's going to steal away some carries too. Now, it's not going to be touchdown work. I think Jacobs is still going to be fine. But him being an RB8 last year was a bit deceiving because he had some big games where he scored multiple touchdowns in, and that's what really propelled his value. On a week-to-week basis, I think I'm rather going to have Chris Carson. I think he's going to be more involved in both the rushing and the passing game. And depending on his health, I think he could wind up scoring about the same amount of touchdowns on a high-scoring offense in Seattle compared to what I think is going to be potentially a really bad offense and a bad offensive line with the Raiders. I worry about Josh Jacobs' efficiency, even with the carries that he is going to get. Again, I have them one spot, separated from each other, but I would lean a little bit towards Chris Carson. I just have a little less concern when it comes to him compared to Josh Jacobs and his overall ceiling. I think there's more of a ceiling there with Chris Carson. Jason, he asked, half-point PPR, which Rams receiver will be the most valuable out of Robert Woods or Cooper Kupp? If you've been listening to the show for any length of time, you know what my answer is. Go ahead, Chris.
I mean, I think you can't go wrong with either. I think Cooper Kupp, to me, is just a preference of mine. I think Cooper Kupp's profile is to be the more effective receiver with Matthew Stafford, but I can't argue strongly that Robert Woods can't either. They're probably going to have similar production just like they did last year. They both have had 90 catches most of the years that they're out there. I think that's going to continue. Cooper Kupp has more had one 10-touchdown season. Robert Woods has never touched, ever smelled double-digit touchdowns. But that's the only difference for me. So I think Cooper Kupp will just be somebody that Matthew Stafford trusts a little bit more in the red zone. So I go Cooper Kupp, but I understand Robert Woods' choice as well.
For me, it's hands down Robert Woods because I have him ranked as a top 10 wide receiver. I love Cooper Kupp too, by the way. I have him as wide receiver at 19. But to me, Robert Woods will be the number one target in this offense. He'll still be that X receiver. He'll still be the guy for Stafford. And again, I've made this point. I do think Robert Woods is in line for a career high. Now, a career high in touchdowns is only 8, but I do think he's in line for a career high in touchdowns because with Jared Goff gone, I don't think it's automatic that Cooper Kupp would be the number one red zone targeted wide receiver. I think Robert Woods might actually take that now with Matthew Stafford. Either way, both these guys are really valuable with an upgraded quarterback on an offense that's going to be really good, I think, this year anyway. But for me, it would be Robert Woods. Our poll question of the day. After the preseason game, and this was based on the Hall of Fame game last week, I was curious because there was a couple of narratives came out of that game. Do you value Najee Harris more, less, or the same based on that preseason game? Now, 62% voted the same, which is what I agree with. I didn't move him up or down in my rankings based on that preseason game 100%. But 22% said more, 16% said less. The two narratives basically were this. He had a ton of volume. So on the one hand, does it confirm the idea that he was going to get a ton of volume if you had any questions about that beforehand? But the other hand was this, that offensive line's bad. And they show that they were bad. And it shows that even with the volume, he might be slightly inefficient. So do you value him less based on the inefficiencies? Those are the two narratives that came out. Now, I had the same because I already have him projected to get a ton of volume while not being the most efficient running back in the world. And I have him as a mid-level RB2 as a result of that. Chris, where are you at on this?
It changes absolutely nothing to me. It's a running back in preseason. I mean, if anything, I might have a little of encouragement, not necessarily from the volume for him, but for the volume of the offensive line that they're actually out there run blocking. So maybe that has some, helps them kind of be more prepared for the season to start off. But I don't really think it has anything to do with Harris. I think I go with 66% of MB Nation where it changes my viewpoint not at all.
100% agree. That's going to do it for the show. It's a great show. Best 5, Bust 5, Sleeper 5 running backs. Next Friday, we'll be back with the wide receivers. Best 5, Bust 5, Sleeper 5. And that's how we're going to lead it off. And, of course, make sure you're tuning in Thursday as well, both at 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. on the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. That'll be the Full Point mock draft on Thursday. That'll be the first day that we're back as we continue our 2 episodes a week through August. Before we hit September, we go to 5 a week. Make sure you're following us on social media at BellyUpMDFF Show. We have the player news notifications coming out for you guys. Make sure you hit the alerts up because they're completely free and we still give you the edge and get news out pretty quickly along with our analysis. Make sure you check out this episode on your favorite pod streaming app. If you missed any part of it, go back, listen to it at your own pace. We're widely available to you on almost every app out there. Everybody, I want you to have a great weekend. We'll be back next week to talk more fantasy football and to get you guys ready for your drafts. We'll all see you then later.